I distance hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early or staying out late to get as many miles in as possible. Walking in the pitch dark with a low light headlamp gets spooky sometimes. I grew up in the woods of this area. I've slept under our canopy of stars more nights than I can count. And I've trekked thousands of miles of trail, riverbank, lakeshore, ridge, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because it's important you understand I've heard, seen, and smelt about all this region has to offer in the way of the wilderness. So now, my scariest experience though happened at about 4:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for another 30 or 45 minutes, and another hour past that until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between two steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbush, young maple, and old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, zoned out. Then I heard a loud crack, and I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. 4:30 in springtime means I'm the only thing that is making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. Dead quiet. Mid-step, I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts. The thought that instantly flashed in my mind as I stood there, balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't that fall. It wasn't a widowmaker. And I was damn sure I had just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get out of there. To describe it as best as I can, it sounded like a decent sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a smallish tree. More like a fungo bat sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head being that this sound was a crack and not a thud or a thump. And I have described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me, and it was loud and clear. Now, as I stood there, completely shocked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from, and I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant, as soon as I got the courage to move towards the noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This made me very nervous. My head somewhere between meth fiend murder and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass, and I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 20 or 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep to the 180 turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black shadow on the trail. It didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point, trying to be quiet, taking tiny, shallow breath so I can listen while humping it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me so hard that I can't describe. I just imagined wet, rotten death. I've actually worked scenes where humans have expired in a past life as a firefighter. This was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I kept walking fast. By the time I made it to the top of that ridge, I was huffing, and the first light was showing. I didn't stop moving until full light was out, and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in our woods. I've smelled it all. I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall, and especially leaved out branches, makes a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times. I don't know. What do you guys think? This is a true story from my mother's childhood. My mom is in her late 50s, and this happened when she was about 14 years old, around 1971 or 72 in Alabama. It was fall season, so this happened in October or November. My mom did not tell me this story until I was in college, and this creeped me out ever since. Here it goes. My mother is the oldest of 5 children. She has 3 sisters and a brother, who is the baby of the family. One weekend in the cooler months of the fall, my grandfather decided to take the whole family, my grandmother, my mother, and all my aunts and uncles, so 7 people in total, into the woods for target practice with a rifle. My mother grew up quite poor, and they didn't always live in the best neighborhoods, so my grandfather wanted to teach the kids how to defend themselves with the rifle if they need to be. Since it was autumn, the trees were bare and there were lots of dead leaves on the ground. The wooded area was just off a dirt road, so this was a fairly rural area they were in. Since it was so far off the beaten path, my grandfather became startled when he heard the roar of a car engine so deep in the woods. My mom remembers the car as being a blue Ford Galaxy. Despite the fact that my grandfather had a gun, his wife and kids were with him, so he totally freaked out and told my grandma and the kids to hide under a pile of leaves in the woods. He hid with them. The man in the driver's seat got out, dragged the woman's body out of the car, and just dumped her there in the woods and drove away. After my grandfather was sure that the man had gone, everyone came out of hiding, and the woman sat up on her own and stared them straight in the face. My grandfather asked the woman if she needed help, but she said no. She would be fine. She didn't seem to be injured and obviously didn't want help. She hadn't put up a fight with the man when he was dragging her out of the car. She must have known him maybe. So my grandfather cut the shooting lesson short and decided to rush the kids home to safety. He had plans to return to the area later. Well, on the trail back to the dirt road where my grandfather had parked their car, they passed a man in the blue Ford Galaxy driving slowly out of the woods. My mom looked over and noticed that he had a huge machete laying across the front seat right beside him. My grandfather made sure that the man could see that he was carrying a rifle, but everyone was careful not to give away what they have just seen. The man struck up small talk with my grandfather, asked him how he was doing and what they were doing out here in the woods. My grandfather explained that he was just taking his family out for some target practice with the rifle. The man told him to have a nice day and continued driving. The next day, my grandfather went back out to that spot in the woods. However, he did find the woman's wig, her purse, some Kleenex, and a pair of eyeglasses. He collected the items and took them home. According to my grandfather, that area of the woods was known for having shallow graves and being a dumping site for bodies. My mother became hysterical when he walked in the door carrying that stuff. She started screaming, "He killed that lady! He killed that lady!" My grandfather ended up taking the items to the police station, but my mom doesn't think anything ever came of it. She never heard anything else after that. Well, she did hear one other thing about it, I guess. Early next morning, my grandmother called my mom when she arrived at work, just before the kids left for school. My grandmother worked as a cashier and had to be at work very early in the morning, so my mother, being the eldest, was tasked with getting everyone else ready for school. My mother answered the phone, and my grandmother told her not to take the bus that day, that she would come home and pick all the kids up and drive them to school. When my mom asked why, my grandmother said, "Because that blue Ford Galaxy's waiting at the bus stop the whole day, and I don't trust any of it." The dense Maine woods always felt like a second home to me. My love for camping had been ingrained in me since childhood, and it was a passion I was fortunate enough to share with my wife. We were a team, navigating the wilderness together, and those experiences brought us closer than ever. We were the kind of couple who found solace in the untamed, seeking refuge far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was on one of these adventures, deep in the heart of Maine, that we encountered a chilling enigma that would haunt my thoughts for years to come. It was a few years ago, during a 10-day backpacking trip, that we found ourselves in a secluded paradise. We had deliberately wandered off the trail, seeking solitude beneath a canopy of trees. Carrying all the supplies we needed, we embraced the freedom of being surrounded by nature's untouched beauty. Normally, I preferred to sleep under an open sky, but that night the drizzle forced us to set up a small 2-person tent. It was snug inside, and soon after, the sound of raindrops on the fabric roof lulled us into a deep sleep. I awoke with the soft light of dawn filtering through the tent walls. Careful not to wake my wife, I stepped outside to start my day. That's when I saw him. A figure, about 30 feet from our tent, standing motionless, his eyes fixated on me. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. He looked like he had walked straight out of a horror movie, the embodiment of the creepy dude who murders campers. My heart raced, and I mustered a weak attempt at humor. "Good morning, please don't eat me." His response was a chilling silence, his eyes drilling into mine for a few unbearable seconds before he turned and vanished into the woods. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. How had he found us in this remote wilderness? And what was his intent? The encounter left me on edge for the rest of our expedition. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made my heart race. The beauty of the woods was tainted by an unsettling presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As we continued our journey deeper into the wilderness, my thoughts were consumed by the stranger. I wondered about the path that had led him to our tent that morning. Had he been a lost wanderer or something far more sinister? Each night, I scanned the perimeter of our campsite, listening intently for any signs of his presence. My wife began to ask me questions about why I was being paranoid like that all the time, so I finally had to tell her about the encounter, and though she shared my concerns, she tried her best to calm me down. We pressed on, determined not to let the stranger rob us of the joy we found in the wilderness. But deep down, I knew I would never forget that moment. Upon our return to civilization, I became obsessed with finding answers, replaying the encounter over and over in my mind, searching for clues I might have missed. I scoured news articles, hoping to find any mention of a suspicious person in that area, but my efforts proved futile. Sadly, I never went back to that area, scarred about what happened that morning in the beautiful wilderness of Maine. I was just 16, eager for adventure and camaraderie. The night was serene, illuminated by the warm glow of the campfire, the laughter of my friends, and a comforting aroma of s'mores and hot cocoa. Under the vast blanket of stars, we felt invincible, shielded by the presence of 4 adult men who were supposed to protect us. Inside our tent, me and my 2 companions were engaged in typical teenage chatter when I noticed a strange sound. A ragged, heavy breathing, as if someone had just sprinted a marathon. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to my imagination. Perhaps it was one of the guys in the neighboring tent, I reasoned, making weird noises in his sleep or something. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more urgent. Then, amidst the forest sounds, a weak, desperate voice pierced through the air. "Please, help me." It wasn't a voice belonging to any member of our group. It sounded like an elderly man, fragile and terrified. The 3 of us fell silent, our eyes widening in mutual dread. The voice came again, this time ending in a pitiful whimper. The guy at the front of the tent, perhaps motivated by equal parts of curiosity and concern, grabbed a flashlight and unzipped the inner flap, revealing a pair of bare, skinny, and ghostly pale legs. It was a sight that sent shivers down my spine. The legs of a man who had clearly been wandering naked through the woods for a long time. The man pleaded for help, but he remained rooted in his place, as if paralyzed by fear or uncertainty. Fear gripped our hearts as we exchanged bewildered glances. "Keep walking down the trail," my friend at the front stammered, his voice barely audible. "A ranger should be around soon." It was a feeble attempt to both console the stranger and protect ourselves from whatever bizarre situation we had stumbled upon. But the man's response shattered any sense of reassurance we might have mustered. His breathing stopped abruptly, and he declared, "No, no rangers. They keep me here." His words hung in the air like an ominous prophecy, chilling us to the bone. Finally, one of the chaperones emerged from his tent, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. He approached the stranger cautiously, his voice laced with concern, as he asked, "How long have you been out here? What happened to you?" The old man, however, offered no explanation. Instead, he succumbed to sobs that seemed to echo through the night, filling the air with an unsettling sense of despair. With a burst of energy, the man sprinted away from us, disappearing into the woods like a phantom. The beam of the flashlight revealed his skinny, naked form, a shocking sight that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. We were left standing there, our minds struggling to comprehend the bizarre encounter. The campsite that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed alien and menacing. We huddled together, our sense of security shattered, and contemplated the implications of what had just happened. Who was the old man, and what had happened to him? And most importantly, why was he so paranoid about encountering rangers? As the night wore on, we clung to one another, our fear refusing to dissipate. Sleep remained elusive, our minds plagued by the haunting image of those pale, scabbed legs and the desperate plea for help that pierced through the night. Little did we know that our peaceful camping trip had transformed into a scary mystery, one that would continue to haunt our thoughts long after we left the woods behind, forever changed by the inexplicable terror that had befallen us on that fateful night. In the heart of the Arizona desert, Canyon de Chelly, I had set up camp on the Native American reservation. Little did I know that this night would transform into a trauma etched into my memory forever. As I lay half awake, lost in the realm between sleep and consciousness, suddenly, a violent shake of my tent jolted me fully awake. Outside of my tent, a voice, rough and threatening, shattered the stillness promising harm and chaos. My heart raced, and I fumbled for something to defend myself, but my hands found nothing but the fabric of the tent walls. "Can I help you?" I managed to croak, my voice laced with a mix of fear and confusion. But the words just hung in the air, unanswered, as the unseen intruder continued. "My boys are coming over, and we're going to mess you up." In the grip of fear, I longed for some form of protection, but I had no weapon to shield myself from the unknown danger just outside of my tent. If I had possessed a firearm at that moment, the impulse to defend myself might have driven me to shoot blindly through the tent. It was a scary thought, the realization that fear could twist my instincts into something cruel like that. Minutes felt like hours, as the threat outside persisted. Then, a new sound ripped through the night. The unmistakable sound of my truck door being wrenched open and slammed shut, over and over again. My mind raced with the possibilities of what might be happening to my vehicle, my only means of escape. A tense silence followed, broken only by the pounding of my heart. Summoning every ounce of courage, I decided I couldn't stay hidden any longer. Slowly and silently, I unzipped the tent and peeked outside. I saw a shadowy figure sitting in the driver's seat of my truck, the interior light casting glimmers across his face. Panic seized me. My phone, the lifeline connecting me to help, was inside of my truck. Without a second thought, I dashed toward neighboring tents like 100 yards away, desperately waking up fellow campers, telling them what happened and asked if I could use their phone. The responses were a mix of fear and reluctance. 3 people turned me away, their faces twisted with apprehension, until a compassionate couple agreed to help. With shaking hands, I dialed 911, my voice cracking as I relate the terrifying events unfolding in the wilderness. Soon after, the flashing lights of a police car pierced through the darkness, a beacon of hope in my hour of desperation. The local cops arrived. Their authoritative presence gave me comfort. They swiftly located the source of my terror, a drunken 19-year-old, passed out in my truck, surrounded by my belongings, my phone, my iPod, and other personal items stuffed into his pockets. The police officers handled the situation with ease, escorting the intoxicated intruder away in their car. As I watched him being driven away, a wave of relief washed over me. I had survived the night, but the experience left a mark on me. Afterwards, I reflected on the incident, grappling with the knowledge that fear nearly had propelled me into a dangerous choice. The absence of a weapon had spared an innocent young man from my misguided fear-fueled actions. What would have happened if I had a gun next to me in my tent on that night?